Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. Today I'm here with Christina Kimont and she's from Canada and she's currently living in Macau. She's a doula and a childbirth educator. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for meeting with me today.
It's my pleasure.
Tell me a bit about your background and how you came to be a doula.
I first became interested in birth work after the birth of my son in 2011. I had him in Singapore, and we had just recently moved there from Canada. And I was really unfamiliar with the medical system there. I was unfamiliar with birth in general, as he was my first child. And being somewhat nervous, I decided to do a lot of research. So I really studied up on all of the different options that were available to me. And I myself hired a doula and practiced hypnobirthing. Took a hypnobirthing class with a local educator there. And I had a really wonderful birth experience.
Can you please tell me what is hypnobirthing?
Certainly. Hypnobirthing is a childbirth education method that was developed by a lady called Marie Mongan in the United States. And basically it uses a variety of techniques to help relax a woman and release her fears, because it's based on the idea that fear is related to tension and tension is related to pain. So deep relaxation and self-hypnosis techniques to alleviate the pain of childbirth.
Okay, fantastic. So that's what you did with the birth of your first child.
Yes, I did.
And you were still able to do that in a mainstream hospital?
Yes, actually, hypnobirthing was developed for use within the hospital system. However, talking with a lot of my online mom group friends, I realized that my positive experience around birth was not at all common. And I realized that women deserve to have the birth that I had, or the birth that they want to have, as opposed to feeling dissatisfied or even traumatized by the experience that they have. A few months later, I was talking with a local doula in the Singapore community, and she convinced me to become a doula. I felt called towards it, and she was very encouraging. So I took an online course with Childbirth International and really learned about communication techniques and physiological birth and all of these things, and began supporting women in birth in 2012.
Fantastic. And do you support births both in hospital and in the home environment, or is it just outside of hospitals?
Well, in theory, I do and would support women in home birth environments, although that's not really a possibility here in Hong Kong or Macau.
Is home birth legal in Hong Kong?
I'm not a legal expert, so I can't claim specifically. However, what is not legal is having a registered attendant with somebody who's giving birth in a home. So a registered midwife or an obstetrician would not be allowed to attend a birth at home. If a woman chose to birth at home without an attendant, I'm not sure if that specifically is illegal, although there's not, I don't think, a huge number of women who would choose to do that. However, I believe in Macau, if a woman had what they describe as a planned unassisted home birth, she would probably face consequences like having a lot of trouble registering the birth of the child and having a lot of trouble with all of the bureaucratic things. And they may even go as far as to bring in child protective services and accuse them of neglect. That type of thing is shown up in unassisted home births in North America for sure.
Do you go in and assist in hospitals in Macau then with some women?
I have done, and the public hospital there has since changed the rules that only attendants who happen to be the father of the child that is about to be born are allowed in there. So I cannot do that anymore. However, some pregnant women in Macau choose to come to Hong Kong to give birth. So they will come to places like Matilda Hospital, and I have attended births here in Hong Kong as well. Do
you find that you've got a lot of work in Macau and in Hong Kong, or is it something that's really not very well known and not very popular?
It's not very, very well known in Macau so far. And because of the difficulties of my being allowed to be in the birth room as a non-medical person and not related to the family, it has been difficult for women to choose that. However, I am available to give labor support for women in early labor if they choose to do so at home before they go to the hospital. However, I have found that most of my work that I've done so far in Macau is on the education side of things. So teaching women about physiological birth, normal birth, the things that they can expect in the hospital, the things that they have choices about that they may not have known.
So do you find that you're able to give pre-labor care to some mothers and then post-birth care even if you're not able to go into the hospital?
What happens with doula packages generally, through myself and with other doulas other places in the world, is they usually give prenatal care, like 1 or 2 visits before giving birth, where a woman will talk about things that they can expect in labor, about the sensations and the emotions that you may have, hash out some of their fears, and, answer any pertinent questions leading up to the birth. And then usually a doula will give in-home and or in-hospital labor support while the woman is in active labor. And then usually 1 to 2 postnatal checkups as well, to be sure that everything's going well with breastfeeding, the woman's able to take good care of herself and is feeling supported from her extended family and spouse and everybody after the birth, and even to decompress or debrief about all of the big emotional impacts of her birth.
Sounds absolutely amazing, and I wonder whether it takes an emotional toll on you sometimes. It's quite a responsibility playing that sort of role in people's lives.
Certainly. Another colleague of mine referred to herself as a doula as the feelings department. Doulas are not known or are not supposed to do anything medical or physical, clinical, if you will, with their clients, but they do take care of all of the emotional needs. So yes, it's a very emotional job. One of the doula's biggest concerns is what they call holding space for a birthing family. So basically allowing a woman to feel emotionally supported and expressing all of her feelings and emotions and whatever she needs to do during her labor and birth and afterwards.
So from what you've said, you're not actually the one that delivers the baby necessarily.
Absolutely not. So a midwife or an obstetrician or a nurse or somebody would be the person delivering or catching the baby. But a doula generally will hold the woman's hand or provide somebody to lean on or give massage or just be somebody to look into her eyes and tell her that she can do this and she's doing a great job.
So what is the difference between a doula and a midwife?
Well, a midwife is there to be sure that everything physiologically is happening the way it should. They do blood pressure checks and they listen to the baby's heart tones, and they're there to receive the baby when the baby emerges and take care of anything that's physically happening with the mother and the baby. And a doula is not a medical professional. A doula is a person who's trained in various modalities of pain relief and comfort and counseling.
Tell me a bit about your role in Macau with educating people in birth and labour.
I've been working with a pair of Portuguese ladies who are Macau residents who came up with a company called MOMS, which is Macau Maternity Support. So they developed a 9-part course of basically everything that moms and dads need to know before and after they have a baby. With that, I helped develop the labor and delivery part of the course. So everything you need to know about what's happening during labor, and also the breastfeeding part of the course. And so with them, I've been delivering those classes. And then as well, I've also trained in hypnobirthing, which I mentioned before in the podcast. So I became a hypnobirthing instructor.
That sounds fantastic. So do you do that just in Macau? And is that a full-time role, or are they short courses?
They tend to be rather short courses, so it's not by any means a full-time role. But when the courses are scheduled, I teach those 2 sessions, which are a couple of hours each. And then the hypnobirthing class, which is a little bit more in-depth, is 5 classes of 2 to 2.5 hours each.
Do you have any opinions on the benefits or the drawbacks of hospital birth versus home birth?
I have lots of opinions. Now, I must point out that as a doula, my role is to be very impartial. So I provide information and support for women to make their own decisions. However, if you ask me about my opinions, that's another thing entirely. So another big part of my drive and my passion is birth advocacy. There exists in birth paradigm, which we can call the medical model of birth. That's the idea that birth needs to happen in a hospital and it needs to be managed by qualified professionals who can intervene on behalf of the baby if anything goes wrong. While this approach has been really wonderful at improving maternal infant mortality rates worldwide, there also exists too much of a good thing. So with every technological advance that the world has, there can be some drawbacks as well. What this means in the birth world is sometimes putting an otherwise healthy woman into a hospital where she is giving birth leads her to have more medical interventions than are necessary. Studies have shown actually that for normal healthy women, healthy pregnancies and healthy babies, it's actually safer to give birth at home. So what mammals need when they give birth, and humans are mammals, is they need quiet and they need dark dark and they need privacy. The major hormone that drives physiological birth is oxytocin, and oxytocin is the love hormone. It's what's flowing through your body when you're actually having sex, which is what leads you to give birth later on. So what humans need is basically the same things that they need when they're going to make love, and that's kind of the opposite of what you get in the hospital. Now, not to say that hospital birth is bad, because like I said, there are times when medical situations arise and you need to have doctors there. But if everything's normal, I think women should have the opportunity to give birth at home where they're in their familiar place. There are a number of implications for this. Certainly even the microbiome of the baby. The home is the familiar bacteria that the baby is going to need to have colonized on their body. A hospital is going to have unfamiliar bacteria and even superbugs that exist in hospitals. So it's less safe for babies and for mothers. Now, the consequences of giving birth in the hospital are not always immediately apparent, because people like to say that hospitals are a good thing, and they don't want to highlight the risks and the drawbacks of hospital birth. So some of the things that you may not notice are reduced ability to bond with your infant, which can very much negatively affect breastfeeding. A lot of the medications that are given to women routinely, including artificial oxytocin and the narcotics that go in an epidural, can also affect the way a baby attaches to its mother and will breastfeed. So women in this generation have started believing that so many of us are just incapable of breastfeeding, when that shouldn't really be the case. We know now that breastfeeding is extremely important for babies to develop, and a lot of babies are not getting a fair chance at that because of some interventions that were received during childbirth. So I like to say, in my opinion, that women should at least be given the option to birth at home, to birth naturally, and to not have these interventions if that's what she chooses.
So with all that being said, you're saying that you'd like to change the way that people think about birth and labour in Hong Kong and Macau. How would you like to go about that?
Well, being a foreigner, because I'm from Canada and I'm not of the Chinese culture, it can be a little bit difficult to have this view heard, because I think sometimes I'm seen as, or these ideas are seen as something that works well in the West but is not relevant in the East. What I actually need to do in order to have hospital policies be changed, I have to go from the top down. A lot of the time in the West, paradigms shift from people from the bottom, from the consumers of healthcare, making different demands, but this doesn't really seem to work well in the Chinese system. So what needs to happen is I need to go to the people at the top first and convince them of things that need to be changed. Ways I'm trying to do that is by talking in the media, by sending pieces I've written to newspapers for editorials, by blogging myself, and just talking to as many people as I can about birth.
Can you tell me what are the most rewarding aspects of your job?
As a natural-born feminist, I love to see women taking back their power from the patriarchy. Maybe that sounds corny or laughable in some situations, but that really is what is most gratifying for me.
Do you have an anecdote or a story of a really successful birth that you've been a part of that you could share with us?
Well, I have anecdotes. It's hard for me to really rank a birth as successful or better. They're all wonderful to me, honestly. I did enjoy working at the hospital in Macau. It was a challenge because of the strictness of their policies, but also because we had a language barrier. What happened was my client was Western, and so was I, and neither of us speak Chinese, but most of the staff in the hospital speaks Chinese with some English. So we found that the staff wasn't able to really explain medical procedures that they were going to do to her well, and they didn't also really understand the things that were important to my client. So it was a challenge for me, but it was also rewarding at the end to feel like, okay, we made something happen here that might not have happened otherwise. And my client was satisfied. The staff wasn't too angry with me. They didn't throw me out on my head. I did get yelled at a couple of times about taking pictures because my client wanted to have photos of her child immediately after birth, and this is against the rules in the hospital. So I was trying to sneak a little bit on that one. But otherwise, I felt like we actually made a decent communication bridge there.
That's amazing. So empowering for somebody in that situation, and must give them such a sense of comfort and support that they otherwise wouldn't have, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, oftentimes I feel like I haven't even done anything, but my client will tell me that I'm so happy that you were there, and I feel like this went better than I could have imagined, and et cetera. And I feel like, okay, maybe my presence does mean something. And you know what? The presence of a doula, if we talk, maybe if you're interested in this, we can Google continuity of care later on. I don't want to get too far off topic, but just having somebody there with you throughout your birth, even if that person is not doing anything, but just being there with you actually has a positive effect on the way a woman gives birth.
Absolutely. Did you ever read a book called Spiritual Midwifery by Ina May Gaskin?
I love Ina May. She's definitely a heavy hitter in 20th century birth theory. I haven't read that book yet. I have it on my shelf. I have a whole stack of midwifery books that I'm reading right now because I've begun my studies. And I've read other books by Ina May. And actually, I've met her. I saw her speak in person.
Oh, wow. How amazing. Yeah, I think she's just wonderful. It's so interesting to read those stories from the 1970s and how the midwifery group really started because the husbands weren't allowed to go into hospital to have the babies back in the 70s. So they started doing their own birthing in their kind of hippie retreats. And that's how really it began. And it was so inspiring. And it was a book that I certainly read and loved.
Absolutely. And that's almost in the same place that Macau is right now, because I said that the hospital allows only husbands to go in with the laboring women. But a lot of the time they don't actually allow the husbands. I would say probably 5% of women have their husbands with them.
So is it just hit or miss? Just luck of the draw, is it? Whether the husband can go in or not?
The rules are that they need to have advance permission, like 2 months in advance, permission from the hospital for the husband to go in. And then the day of, the woman has to be in a suite that doesn't have another person already birthing in it. And there's only double suites available. So it depends on the day. If there's a lot of people giving birth in there, then the woman may not be allowed to have her husband come with her.
So were you allowed in at one stage into the hospital and they've stopped letting you go in?
Yes, they did change the rules since I was last in there. So now, it used to be you could request to have whoever you wanted to come in, but just one person. Now you can request to have whoever you wanted as long as it's the father of the baby.
Are there any other doulas in Macau?
To my knowledge, no. There may be people who have been doulas and are not active currently. There are other people who are birth professional, midwives from other countries, and people who teach other childbirth education, breastfeeding counselors. There's a spinning babies instructor.
Sorry, what is spinning babies?
Spinning babies is not quite exactly how it sounds. You can actually take a baby and twirl it around. What spinning babies is a method that was developed by a chiropractor for helping fetuses, I guess I should say, babies in utero, get into optimal position for birth.
So it's turning breech babies and things like that.
What they do is help a woman to make her ligaments and stuff more flexible and put her body in certain positions to allow the baby to turn himself.
So what are the personal qualities that you feel you need to have to be a good doula?
I need to be able to be calm in the face of stress, which I think I have that in spades. I'm pretty good at staying calm. Maybe I need to freak out later on, but usually in the time of a crisis, I'm pretty calm. A person also needs to be very empathetic and be able to receive a woman exactly where she's at. So anybody who's given birth knows that there are times when it's very scary, and there's times when it's just very emotional, and there may be a lot of tears. And a good doula needs to be able to receive all that without letting it affect her own emotional state, so that she can stay calm and supportive.
What advice would you give to somebody who is planning to become a doula?
If you're interested in birth and in improving birth for women, I would say first study up about what a doula is and does, and then do some research on doula certifying organizations. There's a whole lot of them out there. I certified with Childbirth International because when I began my certification, I was in Singapore, and it was the most recommended organization that was available to me in that place. And I'm really happy that I did certify with them. They put a big emphasis on the communication aspect of being a doula, as opposed to, I think, some other organizations put a heavier emphasis on the biology of birth and being able to understand that, which I think is really important. But I think the true art of being a doula is in your communication. So Childbirth International, it's just childbirthinternational.org is the website. I would recommend that one. Or else if you're in North America, you can take courses from some colleges and in-person courses, that is. There's also DONA, which is Doulas of North America, which I think is also dona.org. And there's actually probably a couple of dozen other organizations within North America, and there's probably some in the UK and Australia as well.
What advice would you give to somebody who is looking to find a doula here in Hong Kong, but they can only go into one of the local hospitals?
There's a wide variety of hospitals in Hong Kong. So if you were looking for a doula, I would say the no-brainer approach, Google first. Do a Google search and see who's out there, or search on Hong Kong Moms Facebook group, which I'm sure probably is one of the most widely known resources for prospective parents. And if that turns up nothing, you could go to an international doula certifying organization and see if one of those doulas has, one of those graduates has a person locally. Or you could also go to one of the birth professionals in Hong Kong, like the Annerley Midwives Clinic or another maternity professional, and they might be able to recommend somebody to you.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, to work with you, how would they do that?
Probably the easiest way it would be to go through my website, which is macaubirthdoula.wordpress.com. Or you can find me on Facebook as well. It's just Conscious Wellness Macau.
Okay, great. So, Christina, why is it important for women to have the choice to birth naturally, or to have the kind of birth that they would really ultimately like to have?
I think people are starting to find that there's actually a lot of trauma surrounding birth. I mean, people in media and whatnot have come to view trauma in birth as normal, but women are actually experiencing the effects of trauma after giving birth, and we're seeing higher incidences of postnatal mood disorders. So I think a big factor in this is that women deserve to have the healthiest birth possible, and sometimes the way that that is delivered through the medical system goes against what is holistically healthy. So there's keeping you healthy in your body, and as well as keeping you healthy emotionally and in your mind. Aside from that, I think it's important to create a container in which a woman and a child can bond really well, because you find that babies that are bonded well to their parents grow up to become more empathetic, and they grow up to become better citizens, better socialized people in society. And I think this is really important for, on a greater scale, a worldwide paradigm shift. I think more and more people are moving away from parenting practices like spanking or cry it out methods, because they don't speak to them anymore as an idea of what is the empathetic way to parent. And people who are coming up in the world now are becoming more empathetic. And I believe that these things start at birth. The way that you can connect with your parent and feel really wholly supported starts when you're a newborn.
Or in utero.
Yes, absolutely, in utero too.
You're listening to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford with Christina Kimont. Christina had 2 children of her own, and each birth was quite a contrast to the other. Could you tell me about your own personal experience with birth?
Absolutely. I've had 2 babies. So my first child was Caleb, a little boy born in Singapore. Caleb was a completely normal pregnancy and a very normal birth, spontaneous labor at almost 41 weeks, and he was born vaginally in a water birthing suite in the hospital in Singapore, and it was really a joyful experience. Just over 2 years later, I had my daughter after we'd moved back to Canada, and I had been planning a home birth with midwives there. But at 36 weeks, I had a complication in my pregnancy, which meant I needed to transfer my care to the local obstetrician. I won't go into huge amounts of details, but I ended up having an emergency cesarean when I hadn't even gone into labor yet. And so my second birth was completely different from my first. It was very traumatic for me, and my daughter was born APGAR 0, which means she needed resuscitation for 30 minutes, CPR and all sorts of things. And then she was taken away, airlifted in a helicopter to a big city, which was 2 hours away from me. So all of this was extremely traumatic, but it also helped to make my appreciation of birth a little bit more well-rounded, and it highlighted how little I actually knew about cesarean sections up until that point, because I hadn't even considered it a possibility before she was born. It was a total surprise.
I guess, if you've had a good vaginal birth with your first one, that's sort of the expectation for your second one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's not always the way.
Yes, and I was thinking that with my second, I had a really great experience in a hospital with my first, and I thought, I feel really confident to do this at home, and I'm going to have an even better birth with my second, and it ended up being, really scary and really traumatic through no fault of the hospital. The hospital did everything that they needed to do exactly on time and exactly the way they needed to do it, and I'm happy to say that today my daughter is very healthy and normal. But, it opened my eyes to all of the scary things that can happen in a hospital.
Sure. When in that journey did your training begin?
My training began before my daughter was born.
Right.
But I hadn't yet attended any births as a doula before she was born.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. It's interesting. I think many women out there will be able to relate with the contrast in the different births. And I think it can also be said that there can be contrast in the different children as well as they grow up. They can also be quite different from each other as well.
Absolutely.
So did that experience with your daughter's birth make you more able to cope in a crisis and also empathise with women when their birthing situation doesn't go as they had hoped?
Absolutely. I was actually really strongly affected by that birth. I suffered from postnatal depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder for a good long time after that birth. I wasn't able to function at all. The whole experience made me really motivated to help women with postnatal mood disorders and be just much more focused and interested in mental health matters.
I think there's a lot of women out there who do suffer from postnatal depression and mood disorders after they have babies. Would you be willing to talk a little bit more in depth about what that looked like for you and how you approached it and how you overcame it?
Absolutely. Because I was separated from my daughter for the first 2 days after birth. She was taken to another hospital in another town, and I had to stay behind until I could be discharged after my cesarean section. We did not bond immediately, and that had a profound effect, I think, on both of us. She became an anxious child, and I became an anxious mother, and she cried a lot. Every time I held her, she was crying, and I was crying a lot, and I just felt like I was really just an incapable parent. And honestly, it progressed to the point where I was really just not very functional as a human being at all. I had a lot of flashbacks, a lot of anxiety attacks, trouble sleeping. Fortunately, everything went well with breastfeeding. Even though she didn't breastfeed until she was 8 days old, I had been pumping and I kept my milk up, and I'm just particularly gifted at producing milk. So we didn't have any serious trouble there, but we certainly could have if I'd been physiologically different.
So did you recognise this initial disconnection and the tears and feeling like you weren't functioning as postnatal depression?
Absolutely. Although I found that when I went to get help, doctors would hear my story and say, oh, well, that makes sense. You've just been under a lot of stress. And then I didn't actually end up getting any help. It's like, yes, well, I know I'm under stress, but what can we do about it? And it wasn't actually until probably 8 months later that I started taking some medication, which ended up really helping.
Did you take antidepressants?
Yes, I started taking Lexapro, which I know a lot of women try to resist taking any medication because they're worried it might affect their breastfeeding relationship. But actually, that's kind of a myth. There's a lot of different psychiatric medications that you can take while breastfeeding. And so I started taking Lexapro, and yes, it immediately made a big difference. Now, with any mental health disorder, medication is never the only solution. In addition to that, I took cognitive behavioral therapy one-on-one and as well as a support group.
So if there's anybody out there that's feeling like they're not coping or that they're not connecting or they're struggling in some way post-birth, what would be one of the first steps you might suggest that they could do to go and get some help or support?
I would still suggest that they notify their primary care physician. Now, they may find that is not quite enough care, but certainly the physician needs to know. The physician can administer what's called the Edinburgh Depression Scale, I believe. It's just a series of questions about relating to how you've been feeling mentally in the last week. And that can give a number which can allow your physician to refer you to a specialist or for more care.
And as a doula, do you recognise sometimes postnatal depression in your clients and suggest that they seek help?
Absolutely. It can be a sensitive subject because a lot of times people don't want to be told what they're feeling, They want to tell you what they're feeling. So I try to open up conversations whereby people can really introspect, look into themselves, and maybe make their own realizations. But if they're telling me that, it's absolutely certain that something's wrong, I will ask them to seek medical help. But aside from that, it's a little bit, it can be hard to tell immediately after birth in the first couple of weeks because there are big hormone fluctuations and there may be tears regardless.
Yeah, they usually say day 4. The tears come on day 4 when your milk comes in.
Yes. Some mood fluctuation is absolutely normal. So it's hard to say what postnatal depression is until, after a couple of weeks. But if a woman is definitely not normal, you can usually tell in her demeanor. I like to help women prepare for that a little bit ahead of time by encouraging them to think about what their postpartum plan is. There's a lot of attention paid to birth plans, but I think a postpartum plan is possibly even more important. So making sure that you have enough support around you, people to help you with housework, people to maybe take the baby for a walk for an hour so you can take a nap, people to do grocery shopping and cooking for you and things like this, so that you can have enough time to really catch your breath after the baby's born and just focus 100% of your effort on mothering and breastfeeding and caring for your baby.
Christina, thank you so much. It's been absolutely amazing getting to know you, hearing your own personal birthing story and learning all about the role of the doula and how important it is for women to have the best possible birthing journey that they are hoping for. And it's been a real pleasure meeting you. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.